Good afternoon, Professor. You were so helpful in your explanation of what is literature that I'd like to speak with you again. One of my crazy Pakistani professors keeps talking about the new critics. Who in the world are they and what exactly is new criticism?
Oh, you are welcome, dear. New criticism is a broad school of thought that addressed methods of literary criticism which began in the 1930s and 1940s. In America, its roots can be traced to the Southern agrarians.
The what? Who are they?
A group of 12 Southern professors, writers and poets who believed that modern industrial society was making people insensitive to our role in the universe, and that only by experiencing the harshness of life and death in an agrarian society could people fully be aware of their humanity. John Crowe Ransom, often considered the founder of New Criticism, eventually repudiated his association with the Southern agrarians, and moved away from aesthetic considerations towards a more logical, analytical way of studying poetry.
Refudiate. Misunderestimate. We read up. English is a living language. Shakespeare liked to coin new words too. Gotta celebrate it. So, new criticism isn't new?
No, but even though it is a rather dated mode of analysis, it is still practiced in many universities.
Why?
By focusing only on textual analysis, or close reading of text, new criticism does not attempt to impute moral values from the text. Material outside the text, such as biography of the author, other works, or historical background, is not studied. Therefore, a new critical approach to reading text can be value neutral. It does not favor one ideology over any other.
What a relief. I wouldn't want any left-wing socialist liberal hippie commie college professor trying to tell me what to think. Why should I care about a theory from so long ago?
Despite several flaws, it occupies an important place in literary criticism and influences other more recent theories. New criticism paved the way for a more analytical, less romantic response to reading and studying literature. Later literary theories, such as structuralism, semiotics, and post-structuralism, were all in reaction to new criticism.
Who were the most influential new critics?
First, you should know John Crowe Ransom, editor of the Kenyon Review. In his essay titled Criticism, Incorporated, he laid the groundwork for an objective theory of studying literature. Ransom argues that the act of literary criticism is an activity unique to the English department's professors despite popular tradition of including acts of appreciation and historical research in the definition of criticism.
But isn't it important to both appreciate and enjoy good literature? And isn't it responsible scholarship to understand where and how a text is situated historically?
Yes, but Ransom insists that this is not enough and falls short of actual criticism. In his essay, he argues that personal opinion, paraphrases, historical studies, linguistic studies, and moral studies are not acts of criticism. He uses poetry as an example, stating that true criticism would include a technical analysis of the text and an exploration of the essence of the text. These things can only be properly done by a professional who has been trained in the science and business of literary criticism.
That sounds kin to mavericky to me.
If by maverick you mean breaking with pervious traditions, yes. John Crowe Ransom moved the field of literary criticism into the English department of the university, and made it more objective and analytical. He took the study of literature away from philological and historical studies. He said, criticism must become more scientific, precise, and systematic. He paved the way for other theorists who followed after him. So, as we have seen, new critics limited textual analysis to a closed fashion.
What do you mean?
I mean they shut out all political, historical, or cultural influences and meanings, and didn't consider texts written by women.
Oh, that's too bad.
Indeed. In an effort to remain neutral as textual critics, they became neutered as social ones.
Oh dear, why would anyone want to do that?
Well, another critic, Cleanth Brooks, was concerned that by emphasizing the biographical and historical influences on the writer, the poem itself would be stuck playing second fiddle to a critic's own psychologizing of an absent author. Brooks also had a particular problem with paraphrasing.
So what did he suggest a critic do to explain a text?
In New Criticism, metaphors and other technical elements involving a poem's structure rather than its content are what counts, and Brooks suggests that one focus on that point.
Oh, I understand. Poets try to tell the reader what they really mean by putting it into confusing patterns and images that have nothing to do with what they were talking about.
No. Actually, for Brooks, a poet isn't trying to tell anyone anything.
Then it's the poem that's trying - not that makes any sense.
You're right. It doesn't. The poem isn't trying to communicate anything to the reader either. It's just being a poem by employing literary language and technique. It is what it means, and it only means exactly what it says. The poem is irreducible to any meaning except what is already present within it.
I guess that makes sense. But can you explain why paraphrasing is such a terrible mode of analysis?
Sure. Brooks calls paraphrasing a heresy because poems are not simply messages, and if they are analyzed as such, the reader loses the experience of reading a poem.
Experience? That sounds too touchy-feely for Brooks and these other new critics.
Well, Brooks does not mean to say that structure is cold and unfeeling. He explains that the structure creates an experience in the reader as they move through the poem, and the understanding of structure helps one appreciate the work.
Could you talk more about the role of emotion in the text and why the new critics were so opposed to it?
Well, it may be helpful to consider another new critic, William Wimsatt. Wimsatt was a formalist who believed the form of the work contained everything one needs to know to fully interpret the work. He used his criticism in an attempt to legitimize English studies and give criticism a more scientific basis. Wimsatt believed the way to do this was by removing the emotions from the response and basing the interpretation solely on the text. His original work, The Verbal Icon, was meant to help focus the attention on the text itself. It contained 2 essays, The Affective Fallacy and The Intentional Fallacy, which became very popular with new critics.
I'm confused. Why would Wimsatt need to ensure legitimacy in English studies? Everyone studies literature?
Yes, but it hasn't always been a respected content, and many times the emphasis is placed on what a poem or piece of literature does to you, and the criticism before Wimsatt had focused on author's life or social class. These things made English studies difficult to justify as a respected field. Wimsatt focused on a new type of objective criticism where the poet's life became completely irrelevant. This was his attempt to define his work as a definable, justifiable science.
Oh, I think I'm beginning to see why he titled his 2 essays Affective Fallacy and Intentional Fallacy. Fallacy means misconception, right? So, both articles must have something to do with doing something wrong when interpreting the text. I'm thinking it's similar to when the government attempts to control my personal liberties and limit my expression of freedom. Okay. Sorry, maybe it's not really like that, but I was on a roll. I figured out what fallacy meant. Where were you?
Well, in The Intentional Fallacy, Wimsatt creates a message detailing the problems when a reader confuses the poem and its origins, or the intention of the author. Seeking the author's reason for writing is irrelevant because it will be apparent in successful writing. The Affective Fallacy deals with issues related to what it does to the reader, or even politically. Its main point is to keep a classical objectivity when describing a work, which should be the critic's only focus.
I see how these both could truly cause a problem for a new critic, since you are only truly allowed to rely on the text. Emotions, author intentions, or even author background could wreak havoc on a new critic's interpretation.
It might be helpful to shift to someone who created a system of analysis that you may recognize. His name was Northrop Frye. But that we can leave to another day.
Okay, thanks, Professor. We will talk about Frye, the archetypes and the structuralist movement next time.